Ring ring, it's time for another episode of Crossplay Conversations, the show where we dive deep into the world of video games while keeping it light. I'm your host, Luke Lewis, and today I am joined by the sneaker savant, Joseph Hooper.
What's up, everybody? My prop for today, we got a little birthday card here.
Little birthday card. It's your birth month, right?
It's my birth month, but this
Happy
was for
early
Flora's birthday. This was actually for
Oh,
Flora's birthday.
dog
A
birthday.
4-year-old,
Love it.
4-year-old little baby.
Maybe she'll make an appearance.
Maybe. You never know.
And rounding out our trio, it's the Wii U Wonder Kid, Jacob McCourt.
Hi, I have a delicious beverage of the alcoholic variety to talk about a messed up video game. Let's go.
It's some good, just getting right into it, as does the video game Mouthwashing, which is what we're talking about today. For those that aren't familiar, it is a narrative horror, lots of different things experience. It's kind of one of those games, the less you know, the better, but we're going to get into that among some other things we've been playing. But let's kick things off with our icebreaker question, y'all. Within the theme of mouthwashing being an unexpected surprise this year, I'm curious, what's a game that genuinely surprised you and why? Whether it was its narrative, whether it's gameplay, the level of like technical polish, what's something that really caught you off guard? And it could be recent or, a more nostalgic pick.
I can go
Should
first.
I? Yeah, just go ahead and start us off.
I like to talk about Soma wherever I can, sort of the indie horror game. And Soma surprised me in a couple of different ways. One, because the game starts out in Toronto. Shout out Toronto. But more importantly, I think I was surprised by the amount of depth in the story for that one. I just thought it was a sort of walking horror game, more like without combat. But the game is truly way more, and it makes you at times question the meaning of life. And so whenever I talk about games that have surprisingly deep stories, I always like to point to Soma as an example of a game that had a surprising amount of depth and a cool twist that I won't spoil here. Maybe on a future show.
Right on. Soma's a great pick.
Can I have one more? Spec Ops The Line.
Ooh,
just in the fact that it is like, on paper, it is a third-person shooter, but the end of that game is something on YouTube that I play at least every other year. Just the final sequence of that game is so rad, and if you've not played Spec Ops The Line and you don't want to play an 8-hour middling third-person shooter, then do yourself a favor and at least watch some of the story stuff on it, because it's rad and it's fucked up in the best way.
Yeah, that hits on the note of like genuinely surprising and like, wow, this was way more than I expected. This was way more substantive than I thought it would be going in. Joseph, do you have a pick?
Yeah, I'll throw out. I mean, there's a lot of games I could go to, but I'll say Tunic. I'm split. I'll say Tunic, but then I also want to say Outer Wilds. Tunic, it's just kind of like, in terms of how deep the rabbit hole goes, like everything's a secret, the way secrets unfold, like the way that even after you beat the game, there's secrets within secrets, where I'm like, what the heck? Like, I didn't even realize this was a thing. It's just it was such an enjoyable experience, where it was just like, I could not stop discovering things, and the game was just so well thought out. I love Tunic for that reason. Outer Wilds.
Yeah. That's a good one too.
I mean, yeah, Outer Wilds is absolutely, you could not have prepared me for that game. Well, I guess you could have, but like going into that game blind and just watching it all unfold through such a unique gameplay mechanism. I'm trying to say it without spoiling anything, but yeah, absolutely blew my mind. Will probably stand the test of time as one of the greatest games I've ever played, without a doubt. So
yeah, both of those that you mentioned too, I feel like have like a particular visual aesthetic that make you think you know what the game is, and then takes you down different directions. Like Tunic especially is like, oh, this looks so cute, I can't wait, and then it's like, oh, this is like actually in some senses brutally difficult, but also really engaging and complex.
Oh yeah.
Hell yeah. I'm gonna shout out a couple narrative games when I thought of this question, I immediately thought of Gone Home and
Yep.
What Remains of Edith Finch,
Uh-huh.
in a sense that you really think the story is going one way and then it goes a completely different direction without spoiling Gone Home. Like I I feel like I can kind of talk broadly
I
about
feel
Gone
like that
Home.
game is at least
Is it
15 years
old
old
enough?
now. Is
Can
it?
It's
I?
pretty old, yeah.
Okay.
10?
Full. Is everyone good with me spoiling Gone Home?
Yeah,
Go right
2013.
ahead.
It's been 11 years. I
Okay,
think the
listeners, I'm
moratorium on
spoiling
it's
Gone
over.
Home. At like halfway through that game, I was convinced it was a horror game. I was like, we're gonna find a body in the attic. Someone abducted this girl. Like, where did she go? This is all very charming and interesting, and I'm engaged from the jump. But I was like, this isn't going to end well. And I
Yep.
feel like it's like this foreboding like vibe, and like even once you've played the whole game, like there are some like dark themes and all this shit that went down with the, I believe it was the uncle character. It's once again almost been 15 years, so it's been a long time. But that game on its surface, then it becomes this like beautiful love story, and there's like so many components to it, and it's like, um, yeah, that was a big surprise for me. And then What Remains of Edith Finch, similar vibe in a sense that all the different gameplay mechanics and the places you go and the way it's like grounded but also fantastical at the same time, like chef's kiss.
Yeah.
I'm just looking at the reviews on Steam, and I don't want to say this game has Gone Home has been review bombed, but the negative reviews on it have definitely amped up over time.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I wonder why. Why.
I was gonna say, are people just saying "sweet baby" a whole bunch in the comments, but it's actually people saying like $19.99 for an hour of gameplay. What?
Oh, it's that crowd.
Yeah, it's that crowd.
So you have the 1 hour per gameplay,
Yeah.
1 hour per $1 gameplay or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Crowd. Okay. Yeah.
Was that like one of the first instances of that where people were like really arguing? Because that was, I feel like, one of the biggest like viral pops of like short game good,
Mm-hmm.
and then the debate kind of ensued.
Probably, yeah. I think that and what's the other game? Firewatch were kind of like one of the few
within
like
a couple
early
years of
walking
each other.
simulator
Yeah,
type
yeah.
short games that popped off. Yeah, I mean, very relevant for one of the main games we're going to be talking about here.
It's funny. I was going to
Which
bring
is
up
also
Idle
quite short.
Thumbs, the podcast, and be like, that sounds like a discussion that Idle Thumbs would have been at the forefront of, to be like, hey, games do not equal price. And then you bring up Firewatch. Campo Santo is Idle Thumbs. Look at us. Same brain.
Oh,
Firewatch is a good one too. Once again,
Yep.
surface level. I know what this game is. Goes in unexpected directions. I think that's like
yes.
my favorite type of narrative experience, where I think I know what it is and I'm excited for that thing, but then it plays with my expectations in a way that just makes me love it more.
100%.
I mean, we have tons of like fun 4 to 5 hour games that are coming out right now. We're going to talk about at least 3 of them here. And then there's even more that have just come out. Phoenix Springs just came out. Excited to dive into that one. Europa just came out at time of this publishing, and that's about a 4-hour game also. So I don't know, guys. More short games. I don't know how you're feeling.
We're in our
that's
golden
the vibe.
era. Yeah, no, it's wonderful. Segueing into our main review game tonight, we're talking about Mouthwashing, developed by Wrong Organ, published by Critical Reflex. Shout out to Sandbox Strategies for providing code for all of us so we could check out this one. This one's been on all of our radars for a while since we saw it at the Mix.
Shout out Kai.
Shout out to our friend Kai. If you're listening to this, the game is awesome. I'll just jump right ahead and say that, but we're going to get into why and specifics and what we think about it. But this, I wanted to kind of set the stage with that question about like expectations and like what we think a game is and how then it defies that or sticks with that vision. Because I think Mouthwashing is definitely this. There's layers to this that we're going to get into. So I think we're going to start with just like quick elevator pitch of what the game is. We'll talk about our general impressions without digging into like narrative specifics, because I do truly think it is one of those games that's like best served if you're at all interested, just jump in blind and play it. And then towards the back half of the show, we'll get into some spoiler filled discussion and theories and interpretations and all that good stuff. So Jacob, I want to start with you, because you were the first to beat it, I think, of our group, and You were very excited and you had a lot of thoughts, and I feel like we've been waiting for this moment, this pod, to really get into it. So, quick elevator pitch. What the heck is mouthwashing? And then overall, what did you think of your time with the game? Spoiler free to kick things off.
Spoiler free.
Spoiler light of
Spoiler
like
light. And so, Mouthwashing is, in the simplest term, a first-person horror game. Um, I think even saying a first-person horror game sort of gives a little spoiler, but there's stuff in the trailer. You can kind
Nah.
of surmise that that's what it's about.
there's eyeballs in that key art. You know,
Yeah.
there's stuff going on.
Somebody screaming, Jacob, there's a wrapped up body in the trailer of this one. Like, what do you expect? But essentially, you play in a crew of 5 members of a spaceship called the Tulpar, and you are essentially in space on a 400 plus day route where you are delivering something in space. When all things go terribly wrong, there's an accident and the crew ends up stranded in space. And so what this game does is, in a non-linear way, very much like Tarantino's films, if you think of the way that they are sometimes edited, where the story is not a straight path, this is the same, where you will get scenes from before the accident, during and after, and it's kind of your job to figure out who's telling the truth, what's happening, and kind of see all ends of it before, during, and after kind of play out in glorious fashion.
Solid. I think that touches on everything without getting super specific. What did you think of your time with the game?
This is going to be one of my favorite games of the year. I don't think that that's a surprise to either of you, having heard how much I've screamed about this video game for the past couple of weeks. But I think what I really appreciate about this one is, yes, sure, on its face, it has that PSX style. The graphics might not be we're talking about Crow Country, which sort of has a similar aesthetic and vibe, but like a very low poly look to it. But what I appreciate about this is that it is the first horror game that I can think of in the last couple of years that I've played that just felt like there was such a firm grip on the like directorial sort of way with this, where they were telling you a story and the people putting it together just knew exactly what story they wanted to tell and did so in the game in a way that I've not felt in a while. Of like, it just felt so authored and so well put together that on paper it is way better than the sum of its parts.
I like how the point you made about like how intentional and authored the experience feels. It hit on a similar vibe to me as Alan Wake 2 last year.
Yeah.
Very different games, very different experiences, but I think when you think about like having a vision and having a narrative experience that you want to take the player on this like elaborate journey, I think similar levels of genuine passion on display, which I think is really cool to see.
And we also got to see some of the inspirations for this game, and obviously there is stuff like your Twin Peaks that are sort of at the forefront of this, but even less obvious inspirations. Anya, one of the characters, is just clearly inspired by like Wendy from The Shining, or like some of the spaceship areas are based on like 50s Vegas hotel motifs and decors, where it's just like, how did you think of this? And how
Everybody
did you put
loves
all
a
of this
bright
together?
orange couch.
Yeah, Bond villains love it.
Yeah.
And so do these guys.
Hell yeah. Joseph, what did you think about your time with the game?
Yeah, so I've been anticipating this game for quite a long time. I kind of stumbled upon it at a Steam Next Fest, I think at the beginning of this year, I want to say. And ever since I played that Steam Next Fest demo, I was like super excited to get my hands on the full game. And yeah, I really, really enjoyed my time with this game. I am a big horror movie aficionado, um, especially horror movies with like very interesting concepts. Movies like It Follows, movies like Hereditary or Midsommar or The Strangers, just like, movies that don't necessarily lean into just over the top gore or just like trauma. Like they play around with interesting ideas. And hot take, I think the majority of games don't do a great job at telling stories. I think the games that do a good job stand out. Like obviously Last of Us, we talked about Gone Home, Firewatch, but out of those games, there's hundreds of games that come out every year, and I even some of my favorite games, I feel like I'm not really gripped by the story. Um, so to have a horror game like this come out and have such an intriguing story with such interesting characters, um, that can really nail one of my favorite genres in movies, um, and really capture that feeling of, wow, this is like scary for all the right reasons
Yep.
in a video game. Um, I was very satisfied in rolling the credits, right? Especially as all the details started unraveling as you went through. Um, I have like small nitpicks here and there, but overall, like for the overall vision of what this game set out to achieve, very, very pleased and satisfied with the final product.
Yeah, definitely. I think I'm in a similar camp to both of you. I really enjoyed my time with the game. I was really surprised at the level of just like intrigue I had with the story and the characters within it. And I think, we mentioned on a technical level, this game is, I don't want to use the word basic because it's not basic, but
Yep.
it's like intentionally more in that PS1 style vibe, but they do so much with it, and they give these characters so much range. And even from a gameplay and level design perspective, I almost thought it felt like almost like a Tarantino style play. Like it takes place in such a small setting with this ship, but they do so much with it visually and within the story, and you get used to these environments, which I always find really satisfying. I think about like Resident Evil 2 with like the Raccoon City police station of like
Hmm.
you get to know a space, and then as you're thinking through these puzzles, like you know where to go next because you recall what happened. And it's this like open-ended thing but like within a confined space that makes it feel approachable, which I think like the two things for me that stand out with this game are the narrative and just the level of intentionality behind the level design and the structure. I think within this like tight knit experience, it's just really impressive what they did.
I thought a lot of Ridley Scott. You say
Yeah.
Tarantino, and I mentioned Tarantino of the non-linear storytelling, but Ridley Scott is a director I thought of a lot, especially Alien and The Martian, because in both of those films there is a very small environment. I mean, small-ish environment, but I think a lot of on Mars and then the ship in Alien and how this ship is small, and you kind of you get to learn your way around it really quickly, but it just feels so lived in. And even the smallest details of a poster on the wall that does that like dystopian retrofuturism thing of like corporation is your friend until it's not, even with horsey mascot. And it was those small details that I really loved. Beyond what you mentioned, also, we've talked a little bit about the characters, but I think there's no spoken dialogue in this one. But I think the writing in between the characters, like the dialogue, writing characters is hard, and I feel like a lot of games actually don't write dialogue between two characters very well, especially if it's not voice acted. But this game fucking nails that in a way that I think few games, especially at the indie level, do.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. I think that's super key. And that was like one of the first things I noticed. Like back in the Steam Next Fest demo, it kind of opens with you talking to uh, the doctor and you kind of having this like routine evaluation that she does for all the crew members. And just that opening scene that you have between those two characters is such um, a authentic is not the right word, but it just seems like a high level interaction, like a really well written
Mm-hmm.
interaction in terms of like, okay, this character doesn't necessarily have an archetype immediately, right? It's not like, oh yeah, this is the smart character, this is the doofy character. It's kind of like, okay, this character has all of these emotions on display just by talking to them, and you as your character clearly have a certain tone about you that you're speaking in, and all of these dimensions to you, and like being able to get all that from just that first scene, I'm like, oh my God, thank you so much. This is so refreshing, because I think, like I said, a lot of games, even some games with good stories, they kind of fall into the traps of, this is that character, like,
Yep.
you know. So, and I kind of hate that, especially because I do kind of look to video games as like being one of my favorite mediums and telling some of my favorite stories. So this was awesome. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up.
I mean, even the archetypes like Swansea, who is the mechanic, he could have been written poorly to fit an archetype of like, he's the grumpy old man who used to be an alcoholic, like that as an archetype. But as you
Mm-hmm.
go through the story, you learn a lot about him, and like given the situation, his psyche devolves in a way that
Right.
could have been written really poorly but wasn't.
Right.
I also want to give a shout out to the sound design in
Mm-hmm.
this game. Once again, like minimal but goes a long way in terms of like the thud with your footsteps, or hearing things off in the distance, or hearing voices, or hearing sounds on the ship, and then add in the cool like synth music and different little sound effects and things they have for like the sequences of events as you're experiencing things. Like, so cool, so like putting you in that time and place, and just such a vibe.
I mean, even the we haven't said the word mouth yet, but even the more gross sounds of like,
Mm,
without spoiling things, there is a ton. So we know this from the trailer that there is one character who's sort of been horribly burned and has been disfigured and is sort of wrapped up like a mummy. And at one point, you have to administer. This is very quick. You have to administer medication, and even the small sounds of you putting like opening their mouth and then hearing like the of their mouth opening and then swallowing a pill was just so, it made me feel so uneasy, and that was the
yeah.
added layer that you don't normally get in a lot of games.
Yeah. 100%.
That type of thing, without getting into spoilers, is the thing where I was like, what the heck am I playing right now? But in a way of like, I need to see where this is going. Like, where are you taking me? I have to know. um I think one question to segue into spoilers, but before we leave spoiler free stuff, how scary did you feel like this game was? Is this an okay entry point to a horror adjacent gamer? Do you need to be into scary shit to play this? What's the vibe check? Maybe Joseph, if you want to kick us off.
Yeah. I mean, I personally, I didn't really find it that scary, or like there's a little bit of tense. There's a few tense moments, and like I guess there are a few like, I would consider some kind of scary moments, but there's not really any jump scares for the most part. There's nothing like, getting all in your face and like making you throw the Steam Deck or mouse or whatever. So I thought it was like, I thought it was fine. If anything, I think it's more of like disturbing as you like process the story, but it's not like you're playing Outlast or anything.
Yeah,
Yeah,
this game made
deeply
me like
unsettling.
question humanity, think about the world scary, not like, oh my god, that was the scariest thing I've ever seen. I don't know. There definitely are a couple like jump scary moments, or like moments where I like freaked out a little bit, but yeah, I would say not not too bad in the moment to moment. Jacob, what do you think?
Yeah, I think I had about two jump scares, and one of them I still sort of think about when I think about this game. I'm like, ooh, that moment was a bit of a jump scare. But yeah, it's more deeply unsettling than jump scary. So if you've seen Hereditary or what's the other A24 Florence Pugh
Midsummer.
Midsummer.
Midsummer, if Midsummer or Hereditary were fine, then you'll be fine with Mouthwashing.
Yeah.
I think that's fair. I think that's fair. Right on. Okay. Any other spoiler free anecdotes? Thumbs up to mouthwashing if folks are interested.
I have one more.
Yeah, go for it.
I will say that I really appreciated the humor of this game.
Yeah.
The game does a really good job of setting its own tone and its own pacing. And it's not like, sure we can define it as a horror game, but it's not like, okay, you start the game and the goal is to scare you. Like the goal, the genre is horror, but it really does define its own atmosphere, which I really like. Where it's like, oh yeah, the reason the game is called Mouthwashing, I thought was pretty funny. Like the reveal of like why
Actually,
it sets that up, right? And you're like, oh, that's pretty good, and like just some of the interactions that the characters have in general are pretty humorous, and it's also not like, hey, you were stressed out, so we're going to tell you a joke now. It just all organically flows, right? And I think that once again, like mirrors real life, which makes the game a little more unsettling. Where you're like, oh yeah, this is how something an interaction between two characters would go. This is how somebody would make a joke to like break the tension or cope with the trauma type situation, which I really appreciate, right? As the more elements they can add to this game to make it feel like a realistic situation, I'm all down for. So I really appreciate it, like the tone shifts constantly of the game.
I think there's one thing before we go into spoiler territory where I gave this game a 9.5 on the gaming brief. I think it's masterful, although there is maybe one or two puzzly sections that I think, are a little more obtuse than they need to be. And that's sort of my only complaint with it, is that, hey, you may have to look at a guide to figure out one or two sections, but apart from that, this game's pretty perfect.
Yeah, I would say my piece of advice on those couple sections, don't overthink it. Like, if it's telling you to do something, do that thing and don't try to do more
Yeah.
without getting into spoilers. We can talk specifics here in a minute, but cool. Yeah, I think that's a good time to jump into some spoiler discussion. So if you haven't played Mouthwashing or you're at all interested, go check it out. Come back. This podcast will be here waiting for you. But let's get into some spoilers. I want to talk about that ending, that whole ending sequence of. I just want to know, like, how you interpreted it, what you thought happened, slash did that, were you satisfied in the end? Were you like, ah, yes, the arc has been completed,
I don't know, Luke, do you
gloves
want
are off?
I feel like because you brought it up first, I want to throw it back to you
Sure.
and say how you interpreted
Okay,
how it ended.
that's fair. I think I've beaten it the most recent of the three of us because I finished it last night. Um, so I think you could kind of look at the game in multiple angles. Of
Mm-hmm.
there's like the personal narrative of the captain and the crew of the ship.
Mm-hmm.
You can look at it as like a social commentary about society in general,
Mm-hmm.
about things like greed and about like taking responsibility for your actions. Those sort of like general themes. Um, so I think the story kind of works in multiple ways, in a sense that you can interpret it as just like a straightforward like character journey, or you can interpret it as this larger meaning.
Mm-hmm.
So in the end, when you have Jimmy putting the captain into the cryo sleep, that's
Yep.
him like reckoning with the mistakes he's made in the past and like coming to terms with that. And then he kills himself, and it's like kind of crazy. But then there's also like all this symbolic stuff of like the like weird horse baby in the heart thing, and like there's some specific like symbolism things that I'm like, I can interpret this multiple ways. I don't know what the like canon definitive interpretation of it is, but I think it's like it's definitely examining society and how we view ourselves and our actions within this larger sphere of life. What did y'all take away? You can we could have like a 2 hour philosophical discussion on this if we wanted to, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious what your like initial thought was.
Who man me or you?
Go ahead. Go ahead, Jacob.
I think for me, for the longest time, and I'm going to sound really dumb when I say this,
No.
but I didn't really know if I was playing, like, at what points I was playing Curly and Jimmy. I was like, wait, when am I
And
playing?
I think it wanted you to question that.
Yeah, the
up until the
unreliable
end.
narrator.
Yeah.
I was like, ooh, unreliable narrator. We're doing this, huh? And I don't know if it was like at the 2/3 point, but I sort of realized that, oh, I'm actually playing Jimmy, and Jimmy's just the fuck up, and I'm playing the fuck up who is slowly losing himself and his grounding in reality, and is taking it out on every single person around him. The gun sequence with Swansea where it then becomes a first-person shooter was wild. And
That
the
was
whole
the only part where I was like scared. Anytime where someone's
yes.
like hunting me, I'm like,
Mhm.
I don't know. This
But
is
that whole
scary.
thing is essentially like, no, Jimmy, you're in the wrong here, but you're gonna kill Swansea because he's kind of the person that's like standing up to you. And I can't remember how much of a fuck up he was like, you're a fuck up, but that seems like something Swansea would say of like, or just the vibe is, hey man, all of this is your fault. But sure, you can kill me because I'm a drunk. It's cool. We're in space.
Yeah. And then you get into the whole symbolism of like mouthwash as a whole of like I agreed with y'all when we were talking about it with spoiler free of just like I loved that reveal. I thought that whole use throughout the game was really clever and it did like earn the like oh that's fun, that's interesting. And like I also thought all the dystopian stuff that they did with it too of like this little station where you're like mixing stuff together to make the cake and all that, and then how the cake came back and juxtaposed with the body and all that stuff, like that was all like really well done to me. Sorry, we're jumping all over
Yeah.
the place, but looping back, Joseph, just to your like initial
Yeah.
takes from the narrative arc.
Yeah, I really like how it all unfolded at the end. I like the concept of, okay, this guy who the whole game you think basically doomed you all, and you guys are keeping him alive because like you guys kind of feel bad or whatever, but everybody kind of like hates him for what he did. And you start to realize, okay, so he the whole time didn't do really anything. He was doing the things that he thought he should as a leader. Um, but no one else know, like the only person that knows the truth is your character who you're playing with.
Yep.
Right. Um, and just like the concepts of, okay, the character you're playing as has all of this, like these things happening to him where like he got this woman pregnant and basically
Yeah.
doomed their child. Like all
Okay,
of this
so
stuff
that
is
did happen. I'm glad
Yeah.
that
that
Jimmy's
okay.
a
happened.
fuck up
Yeah.
in multiple
Yeah.
ways.
Like the aspect of like Anya locking barricading herself in the room and taking the pills when I thought she was gonna kill Curly or whatever. And then just like the concept of all these people just knowing that they're gonna die, like they don't really have any hope, was just so interesting. Like just seeing them slowly degrade over time. Like the intern who was trying to stay as positive as,
Daisuke, I think is his name.
yeah, like
Daisuke. Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, all of those components just coming together and then just ending it beautifully with just in the most fucked up way. Like yeah, the character you thought was trying to hold everything together is actually the reason you're in this situation in the first place. And also the corporation kind of just fucking everybody over in the
Yep.
first place, and the feeling that you're gonna have everything taken away from you, like you're like as people who only know this job, they've worked on this job for X amount of years, like they're barely surviving, they're trying to get their bonuses and all this shit, and to think, yeah, actually, when you get back home,
You're laid
you're
off.
basically nothing. Yeah, you're laid off. You're nothing. Like, what do you have after this, right? And just that being depressing on itself. There's so many different aspects of this. Not let alone all the shit that I didn't understand.
Mm-hmm.
So I loved it.
Yeah, definitely.
Man, the pregnancy is just a whole. Because I'd finished this game weeks ago, and that is something that I like sort of slipped my mind. That also, like, Jimmy just caused so many problems. He caused so many problems. And
Yeah.
the cargo, we haven't explicitly said what the cargo is. The cargo that they were transporting that was so important for 400 days was crates and crates and crates of mouthwash.
Yeah.
And the way that then they use the mouthwash of like it starts with scattered bottles amidst the environment to then get into the later sections where you're just walking on like piles and piles and piles of mouthwash bottles and they're falling
Yep.
and it's like something out of like I immediately go to like a Christopher Nolan shot. Like it just felt so cinematic, but then in this like PS1 poly look, it was just like, whoa, this is crazy. Like that's where it brings in this like modern scale and technical thing, and that's why I didn't want to call it basic, because like nothing about this game is basic. Like it's so intentionally um impressive. But
and even like what the horse sort of represents in that at multiple points. So the like I said, the game is sort of told in a non-linear sort of way. And so sometimes, and the thing that I kind of had to figure out is like sometimes you are playing Curly in the past, and sometimes in the future you are playing Jimmy. But beyond that, the horse Polly, who is sort of the corporate mascot of the company, the Pony Express, he starts off as this small horse. And then at one point, we alluded to this in the pre-spoiler section, he then becomes a huge, scary, spider-looking horse thing. And at the end of it, you're just talking to this horse like it's a humanoid thing. That it's almost representing the side of the corporation, and it's talking to you like an AI. It's wild. It's wild shit.
And like visually too, everything they do with like TVs and like you're watching the TV, and I love how it lets you like sit in moments as long as you want and doesn't explicitly tell you to like get up and move. Like you have to manually like click leave this, like you have to take yourself out of the sequence, if you will, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, there's also a subtle aspect of, I mean, alcoholism clearly, of like okay, we gotta, first of all, we don't have food, so we, in some aspects, we gotta kind of consume this mouthwash for as long as we can, but also like, yeah, we're kind of fucked, and the way we're gonna escape from this is just drink all this fucking mouthwash. And like originally it's just Swansea, but then it becomes Daisuke as well, and I don't remember if like Anya starts drinking it as well, but like everybody's just kind of like trying to get away from the situation, in whatever way they can. And just random moment, putting Daisuke through the fucking vent to get into the medical bay. What the fuck? That was crazy. That was so crazy.
And then Swansea with the axe, and
that's
then like
the
that
moment
whole
that
thing.
scared the shit out of me, that I keep remembering.
Yep.
That moment just like made me so sad, but then it was more sad to me than when Jimmy was like, but we're gonna be okay, and it was like, what are you talking about? Like just the like delusion he had, and then Swansea just being like, what do you do? You put him in the vent, and it was the whole thing. And oh gosh.
But then there's this moment in the sort of common room where they have this giant screen, and like we talked about, like the 50s and 70s decor. Well, there's that moment where Swansea takes the axe and essentially just like destroys the screen, but also at times they sort of use it to project like a night sky. And there's a moment between Anya and Curly where they're just sort of talking about, the illusion that they're a part of and how peaceful it is, yet they know that it's not, it's not permanent because there's this thing happening around them. And it's just, even the way that's directed was just so beautiful. Of the big screen is in the background and you can only see the shadows of the characters while they're talking, and the camera is sort of like slowly panning. It's just really good.
And somehow that low poly facial animation on Anya is very expressive. Like there are AAA games with like facial capture that give you less than I think this scene, which I thought was really cool. I'd love to talk about
cannibalism.
We got that. Oh God. I was gonna say, like, do you have a favorite moment? And my least favorite moment is feeding Curly the like body part over and over and over and over again, and then like the puzzle where you're like moving organ tract intestines around. Like that was when I was like, this is like borderline too far for me, but I'm so committed to these characters right now that I gotta know. But that's when I was like, it was 11 p.m. and I was like, I'm not about this, but I'm gonna fucking do it. We're gonna fucking do it. Yeah, we gotta know.
Yeah, all the cannibalism stuff was rough. That, and then even just like there was a cake in one scene, and then later in the timeline, you are in the same birthday scene, and you are actually cutting pieces off of Curly's leg to eat. Man, fuck, man.
And I don't know about you guys, but I was playing mouse and keyboard, and so to do that, I was like flipping back and forth between the arrow keys, and it made it like so
Ah,
tactile and so like, oh god, I'm really doing this of like chop, 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 and it was so slow that it was like, oh my god, I feel like awful right now as you're doing this. Very, very, yeah, I don't know what the word is, like memorable, but not for good reasons.
Yeah, twisted,
Twisted,
twisted.
twisted is good. Yeah, yeah. We haven't touched on it a lot, but I also want to talk about the puzzle design of a lot of these sections. Of I just thought it was really cool how like I would recall something like an hour plus later, and then go to that section of the ship to solve a puzzle. Whether it was like where the heck would the gun be, and then I remember like that one area in the cockpit that had a like captain's got a scanner gun. I think the game does a really nice job taking like relatively simple mechanics and
Mhm.
then doing interesting things with them. Like one of my favorite sequences was I thought this was tedious at first, but then once I figured it out, I thought it was one of the most visually interesting things they did where it told you never to you were in a like dark hallway with a window lit up, and then it said don't look back or don't turn around, something along those lines, and you have to literally like walk backwards and then like face
Yes.
another window and then walk backwards. And I initially was like, wow, that took me so long to figure out, but then after I did it, it was like you're walking down this long hallway and the windows open. It's like, what game do you walk backwards in? Like it felt like I haven't played Metal Gear Solid 1, so maybe this isn't a great touchstone, but like everyone always talks about the Psycho Mantis boss fight and you're
Yeah.
taking the controller and you're putting it in the thing. Like that, this game felt like that, my version of that. Of like you're thinking outside of the box, you're doing things that don't seem conventional within a like confined space, which I thought was really cool.
Although it's not the same thing, um, they also do a lot with title cards in this, where they will either a lot of the time it's take responsibility, take care of it. So you're essentially getting like fucked up interstitial cards that either put that text over the entire screen multiple times, or um, in the screen to sort of set the stage when it's because a lot of the time it'll be like 0 days to the crash, 2 days to the crash, 2 days after the crash, etc. And sometimes you won't get that, and you'll just get like a scrambled like take responsibility. Which, knowing what we know in hindsight about who we're playing, uh, I kind of want to go back now that I know who I'm playing and what happens in the
And
end,
see the whole.
and see the
That'd be
whole thing
interesting.
again.
Yeah, we also haven't touched on it, but like I love the fact that the game's only 3 hours ish, depending on how long you take with it, which it felt like the perfect length. I was very satisfied with the journey. By the time it finished, I was like, I'm good. I
Mm-hmm.
I saw it through, which was nice.
I'm trying to
where
think
we
if there's
going
anything
next
else
with
that's
this?
important here.
Um, I guess one question to kind of segue out a little bit. I'm curious. How do you think this game handles the balance of being weird for weird's sake within the horror genre? Like, do you feel like everything it does is meaningful? Because I actually did. Because usually I think about movies like Midsummer that we've mentioned a couple times. In aspects, I find that movie very interesting, and I like to discuss that movie. But more often than not, in that movie, I was like, man, this went so far, and I don't feel good about it. I don't feel like enriched by this narrative in a certain sense. Like it was definitely an experience, which I think is one aspect of horror. But I thought this game was weird and unconventional in a way that made me think and made me more engaged with the narrative. How did y'all feel?
For the most part, I agree. I do think like at the end when we're at like complete mental degradation and there's a lot of just like random stuff you're doing and like what is essentially like a fugue state as you're like slowly or you're pretty much descended into madness. there were a couple moments where it was back to back where I was like, I kind of miss having the real story beats in between. Like, you're kind of running, you're walking backwards, then you're in the vent running from the giant horse centipede type thing, and you're in the cemetery, and I some moments hit for me, other moments I was like, I don't really know what's going on here, but it's fine. Like, so at the end, I wish there was a little more story, like real story stitched in between. But for the most part, I would say for 90% of the game, I liked the weirdness in between because like there was a lot of suspense being built in the main story. And then you get broken out to something completely fucking random and you're like, what the fuck is going on here? And it kind of lets you hang on whatever was happening in the real, like chasing down Anya in the medical cabinet. Like you're trying to see what the fuck is going on with her if you can get to her in time, and then you kind of break off into something completely random. I love that kind of aspect.
Yeah, definitely.
The last 20% sort of fugue state is a great way to describe it, Joseph, because it just like I will describe some of the things. You end up killing Swansea, but it's over like B-roll of a city while he's sitting in a chair. That's after you
Yeah.
have a first-person shooter in a cemetery moment where he's chasing you with an axe, and then you crawl through and you get chased by a centipede-looking thing, and then you crawl through a bunch of eyes, and then you do the weird vomit Curly feed him his own leg thing, and then you're out in space. It is wild. But I feel like they did it on purpose because to show the degradation of the character's mental states, and it just fucking goes in 1,000 places. It is directed though. Like they're doing it for a purpose. It is not random.
Mm-hmm.
It may seem
That's
random,
true.
but it is not.
That's true.
I think that's fair. There's only one section of the game that I'm like, I didn't need this. I don't think it added to the experience, and I actively found it pretty frustrating. Was the section where you're walking and you can't be heard by
Yes.
the horse head creature. I don't think the like direction you're supposed to go is super clear, and I also didn't find it interesting or satisfying the amount of time I had to stand still
Yes.
before then moving. I thought it was really effective at building tension, but it took me so long to figure out that yes, you truly just need to stand still for maybe 45 seconds before moving on, which I think there's a lot of things this game does that are like innovative within a confined space, but that was one where I was like, that one didn't work for me, but I appreciate you trying something. So it
No way.
didn't like majorly detract, but I was like, didn't love that one little section.
So I'm gonna say I wasn't standing still for 45 seconds. I'm just gonna. You guys were
Maybe
saying
I was
you were
just
having a hard
scared.
time.
Maybe I'm just
I was like, basically, I was walking really slow, and if the horse got in my face, like you can see him with the UV light or
purple
whatever,
yeah.
that's when I would stop. But then it would like run away, and then I'd just keep walking. I didn't find that it was fresh. It was
okay.
that moment and the walking backwards moment was basically the same type of moment where I am doing it, and I was like, I don't know what to do. And then when I saw the horse in my face, I was like, oh, okay, I can see him if he gets close, so I'll just sneak around. The moment that I didn't understand, which I feel like you felt like about this moment, is the centipede moment where I'm like, it's just chasing. I'm like, what do I do here? Like, I still don't know how I got past that section.
Yeah,
I was
that's
just
my thing
running.
with it.
I just kept walking straight. I was just like, I'm just going to keep going. And then if eventually it tells me to go a different direction, I will. But that one, I just like breezed past in like 30 seconds. But the other
didn't
one
work
that we're
for
talking
me.
about, the quiet horse head one, I was on that for like 30 minutes minimum.
Yeah,
if
that
not
one took me
more.
even longer.
Yeah.
And it was
You
not
said
that
30
I didn't.
minutes?
At
It took
least,
me 45.
Yeah.
There's no what the hell?
Just over and over.
Yep.
And maybe that's why I hated it. Because by
That's
the end, I
crazy.
was like,
fair enough.
I've played a quarter or like, let's do math right now. A sixth of the time of me playing this game was spent trying to
It's
make it
just
through
there.
that section.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
definitely on me because I don't think the developers wanted us to spend 30 to 45 minutes in that little sequence. But it was also weird. I'm going to that one level, it felt weird also because you're following a trail of blood, but then the blood goes away
To
and
invisible wall.
yeah, and then
That's
you
true.
have to
That's
go
true.
all the way around, but everything the level is telling you to do is saying don't go that other
Yep.
way, but that's the way you actually have to go. So once I finally gave up on invisible wall, because I was like scanning it and I was like
Yep.
waiting for the horse to
Same.
come and doing all
Yep.
this stuff and trying all these different things. I don't mean to like stick on this one point because like this is an incredible game. I love it. It'll definitely be on my top 10. But it, to your earlier point, Jacob, it was just like excellent vision, excellent attention to
Yep.
detail, authored experience, genuine, loved it. But that sequence, I was just like, I am so frustrated right now.
Everything in this game, 10 out of 10. Puzzle stuff, 7 out of 10.
Yeah.
And that's like everything but
I
puzzle stuff, 10 out of 10.
I'd say a puzzle stuff aside from that puzzle like a 9 because
Yeah.
I thought it was really cool, like those unconventional things, or like the backwards walking thing, or like the scanning. I liked using the UV scanner thing. You get an ultrasound machine at one point that was like eerie and weird, but also like
Yeah.
that
Oh
was
yeah.
interesting in of itself. Sound design was cool in that section too.
I didn't mind most of the puzzles, but I will say most of the puzzles I didn't love either. Like either they were too easy or I didn't quite understand, like, or I knew what I was supposed to do and it wasn't quite working out for me. Like I mentioned the one with the centipede horse, I never figured out what to do there. But like the one with the ultrasound scanner, like I knew kind of what they wanted me to do, but then it was kind of hard to find the little horse baby in there. I'm like, this is kind of weird.
Once I like fully
Um,
zoomed in, I was like, oh, okay, it just wants me to follow the sound. But yeah, there's some trial and error that's not
Mm-hmm.
always like fun, but it is
that's
part of the journey. This is a game that
my.
I don't know if I would say is fun, but it's definitely
I mean,
interesting. I'm using
I
air
mean, it's no
quotes,
click
audio
holding, that's for
listeners.
sure.
Sure.
I the one thing I would probably like from this game, and if I had to put a score on this game, probably be 8.5 ish. Like I do wish that the gameplay was a little more interactive, or if there were puzzles, they were a little tougher, not because they are just abstract, but just because they are a little more intricate or well thought out. And I think there were a lot of opportunities to do that, especially since you're going into, you know, La La Land, like half of the game. You could probably generate some pretty fun puzzles there.
Yep.
But overall, I thought the puzzles were either just easy, where it's like, oh, okay, got to get the scanner, look at the code here, X, Y, and Z, do it, it's fine. Or kind of abstract and obtuse, but not in like a clever, super clever way. So when we talk about the next game, I'll tell you about some sick puzzles.
Ooh. That's a good segue, I think, to close out on mouthwashing. Last question: Game of the year convos. How are we feeling about mouthwashing?
Top 5, no question.
Love it,
Yep.
Joseph.
Top five, maybe some questions. Actually,
think
I don't. I think it would probably barely miss the top five for me.
I think I'm top 10. No questions.
Yeah, yeah.
It's definitely in the conversation for me. And when we talk about narrative, it's in the conversation for me for sure. So
Yeah.
yeah, excited.
And
Highly
this game will
recommend.
stay with me for a long time. Unlike, when I look at some
Yeah,
of my game of the year
That's
lists,
true.
I'm like, that game, really? I'd put it in as number 4. This game will probably be around there. It'll hover 3 or 4 probably for me, but it will stick with me for a long time.
Love it.
Yep.
Awesome. All right, continuing the trend of some recent indies that we've been checking out. Joseph, you played Crow Country.
Yeah, yeah. I played Crow Country. I had like a free weekend, and something I ever since Crow Country came out and me hearing about it, I'm like, this sounds interesting. Uh, and I don't know, just something about this weekend. We made it into October. I was like, let me try this out. So I played Crow Country. It's about a 5 hour game. I basically spent 2 days, or I guess a full day in total, like playing this game over the weekend, and I absolutely loved it. Um, the pitch on it is essentially there's an amusement park that has since been abandoned called Crow Country, and you are a special agent that has driven out to the abandoned amusement park to investigate some reports of like weird behavior, and you're also trying to get in touch with the owner of the amusement park and basically ask him questions about why it shut down and some allegations about the park. And from a gameplay perspective, it is very much, once again, PS1-esque graphics. And it is paying homage to horror titles like Silent Hill, like very Resident Evil coded for sure.
Give me Parasite Eve vibes. Is that appropriate?
I've never played Parasite Eve, so yeah, 100%. It's just like Parasite Eve.
Spiritual successor.
The gameplay is very puzzle focused. It is like 100% that Resident Evil 2 type vibe, or like you're in this like area, there's a bunch of different sections, you're getting items that then help you solve puzzles on other sections of the map, X, Y, and Z. You have weapons, limited ammo, 100%, like almost to the T. If you play Resident Evil 2 remake, it's very much that same gameplay loop. There's monsters that you can either avoid or shoot down, all the whole 9 yards. And I would say this game is close to a 9 out of 10 for me. Like, nice. I really, really enjoyed it. Once again, as a horror fan, this thing does the other thing I love in horror movies, where it's just a fun idea. You're just having fun. It's not too serious. It's not trying to jump. I mean, PS1 graphics, any game that has PS1 graphics, it's hard to get jump scared. But like, it's not trying to do too much to actually spook you. It's clearly like made by people who are fans of the genre. So you have humor in there. You have a really interesting story. Like, when you start it seems by the numbers, but as you get more and more details, the mystery starts to unfold. And by the end, I was like, what the fuck? I was not expecting it to end like this. And the puzzles I thought were really satisfying. I love the puzzles where, like I said, you need a specific item and you have to remember, okay, how do I get past this thing over here? You're finding clues within the world left by like park attendants saying, oh yeah, like this thing is like creaky, like we got to get the wrench, but you know, the mechanics took the wrench over to fucking SeaWorld or whatever. So you're like, oh, okay, I got to get to SeaWorld to get the wrench. So, I mean, I thought this game great. Like, if I had any complaints, it would be like when you're shooting and aiming, it's top down, like third person. The aiming is kind of janky. I don't really love the way you aim, especially when there's a bunch of enemies
Is it tank
in the
controlling?
area. It's a little tank controlly, which for the most part is not that bad because you're only really going against one or two enemies at a time. If you don't clear out the enemies, then areas get really bogged down over time because more enemies spawn in as the story progresses. But it's tank controlling, which is not a problem most of the time, but when it is a problem, it's kind of frustrating. And that's kind of my only complaint about the game. Everything else I really enjoyed, especially for this being an indie game. I thought it was the perfect length. I really enjoyed the different characters you're running into. There's multiple characters with not as fleshed out as Mouthwashing, unfortunately, but they're archetypes in a good way where it's like, okay, like, you know, this is the crazy, you know, lawyer that works for the park, or this is, and I guess all the characters have a little twist to them as well. So it's not like you see what you get. It's like, as you uncover more about the story, you get interesting tidbits about this character's role in the whole thing, which is very interesting.
I can't believe this game came out this year.
Yeah.
This feels like a last year game.
It came out really early, which is like, that's why.
Yeah, it's been on my radar forever. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I really want to play it. It definitely sounds up my alley. I'm curious, doubling back, you mentioned being able to sneak past enemies. Can you go through the game without doing combat? Is that a possibility, or do you have to, are there like boss fights that you have to do combat encounters, or what's the vibe
you definitely have to do combat at points.
Okay.
But you can sneak past, I would say, most enemies. Wow. There are points where like you're in corridors so small that it's like to you're either going to take damage or you're going to attack this enemy.
I see.
Okay. And there are like mini boss fights in there, but I got an achievement, a Steam achievement, and it was like you took down all the optional bosses. I was like, what the fuck? They were optional? Like how is it possible that they were optional? So apparently the bosses are optional in this. So
Okay.
um,
Nice.
yeah.
I like the sound of the emphasis on puzzles. It sounds really cool.
Yeah, like I'm a obviously big puzzle sicko, and I absolutely loved like seeing something very interesting, and it's not kind of like, oh, I'm in a puzzle room. It's kind of like, okay, this is blocking my path. What is this? Like, what is this code? What is this note that I'm picking up? It's kind of like you stumble upon pieces as you go, and then slowly all the pieces come together when you get to certain areas. Absolutely love that aspect. I think the puzzles would probably be the best part of the game, and I would say the story probably second best. A couple secrets in there as well. So yeah.
Hell yeah, that's awesome. Jacob, you also played another game we wanted to chat about. I think we decided we're going with Grunn. Is how we say it?
Yeah, say it in both ways, just for
Grunn?
safekeeping or for safety.
Grunn?
Yeah.
G-Run. No, it's definitely. I'm just kidding.
G-Run.
G-Run. Yeah, I've been playing. I've not been playing. I have beaten Grunn.
Oh, hell yeah.
I mean, as much as you can beat a game with. I guess this is not spoilers because it is one of the tags in Steam, so I don't feel like this is fine for me to say. It has multiple endings to it. So I've beaten it. I think I've beaten 8 out of the 11 endings, and I've gotten the quote unquote good ending. So I think I am good with Grunn after having played it for about 4 hours. This is from Sock Pop Collective, your favorite indie boy band, as well as Thomas Vanden Boogart. I hope I didn't butcher the name, but essentially it is a gardening game, but it's way more than that, where it literally starts being like, hey, you must tend to this garden this weekend. Over the weekend, you got to make sure you clear out this whole garden, or else that's your one job. But it slowly devolves into something entirely different, where you discover that there's more happening that meets the eye. Maybe there's ghosts and there's items to collect, and there may be, I don't want to call them other dimensions, but there's maybe even other dimensions that you can explore. It just gets wild and wacky in a way that I was not like. Obviously, people were selling it as the gardening game, not gardening game. Wink. I think that's kind of how Jill from the Indie Informer was pitching it as she played it before release. But it's multiple endings and it gets kooky, and it is probably the most Dutch game I've ever played. Dutch things just have a vibe to it, like a fun, quirky weirdness to it. It's a Dutch ass video game.
Okay.
So I'm curious, like, how deep does the rabbit hole go? Because I played the demo and I saw a lot of the stuff you were hinting at, like things, just weird things. So I guess two questions: how deep does it go in terms of like how quickly do things devolve, and how out there can you get? Is it kind of like, oh, I'm in this weird area, or I'm doing this weird thing, and it stops there, or do you keep devolving? And then two, how spooky does it get? Because there are a couple moments where you're like, this is fucking weird, man.
Yeah. So if we were saying that, mouthwashing was deeply unsettling, this game is like weird and kooky, spooky, not disturbing. It's just like occasionally they'll throw you for a loop, and just hey, there'll be and again, this is not. I don't think this is a spoiler because it's like in the first potentially 20 minutes. At one point, there's just this like tall, pale man who's just sitting looking at you from the window with his neck creaked like that. Or there'll be ghosts. So I would say like there aren't that many jump scares, but there are a couple of like really kooky horror moments, and it devolves pretty quickly. Some of the endings, I think my first endings I got to within 11 minutes, where I was just like, huh, I died. Weird. And then my runs got progressively longer as I went. The ideal run, the good run, you kind of have to poke at everything and probably see a couple of the endings to see, oh, I shouldn't do that, because one of the endings is like you get bit by a dog or you get killed by a dog. So oh, I shouldn't go too close to that dog on the second day, or else I'll get killed by this dog, I guess. So you have to poke at a lot of it to find what you need to get to the final ending. So I think every player who sees the good ending will at least see half a dozen other endings.
How long is the good ending run?
An hour.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah,
Interesting.
I think my final end run, and by the end of it, I'd gotten to like 7 endings, and I'm like, okay, I think I know most of what I need here to be able to get to the final ending. So I essentially used a walkthrough where there was just 1 or 2 things that I hadn't really discovered. But beyond that, it was making sure to do things in the appropriate sequence, because there's even some objectives that are tied to specific time of day. So it'll be like, hey, because you get Polaroids are a part of the world where they give you hints to sort of unravel parts of the mystery. And some of the Polaroids are like, hey, this specific thing only happens on Saturday at 8:30 a.m., which means then that even on your ideal run, you have to kind of figure out the sequence of events and do certain things at certain times because of the timing involved.
It almost reminds me of like a Dead Rising game or something with a time loop where you're like retracing your steps and going over the same areas in like different ways.
Like a Stanley Parable or Beginner's Guide.
Okay, cool.
/ Dead Rising, and then make it Dutch.
Okay. I mean, I'm definitely interested, and we love a good 4-hour game as we've established tonight. Yeah. So
I'm gonna have to provide that marketing materials to someone to be like, Beginner's Guide, Dead Rising, make it Dutch. That's Grunn.
I love it.
I would recommend this one. It is I probably don't feel as strongly about it as Mouthwashing, or even how Joseph felt about Crow Country, but it's a cool game.
Nice. That's awesome.
And if you like the vibe that Sock Pop puts out, because I think their shit is so they did Stacklands, they've done like Broom, and I think they were maybe involved in Simland. They've done some cool shit over time. So if you're a fan of them, you'll be a fan of this, I'm sure.
Very good. All right, well, listeners, you got a lot to play. Get out there. Tell us what you think in the comments of mouthwashing. I just want to talk about mouthwashing with more people. So if you have thoughts, I want to hear them. Anything for the good of the order, y'all? Things to plug, things going on in life?
I'm playing that Metaphor ReFantasio prologue.
Oh, are you really? Oh, nice. Okay.
We might got something on our hands here, you know what I'm saying?
It's funny you say that, because I'm going on vacation starting this weekend, and we're visiting family, and I'm going to see you, Joseph, in person, and then when we come back, I have 4 whole days, and I was like, do I buy Metaphor and play Metaphor for just like 40 or 50 hours? And I'm thinking about it.
Get you halfway through the game.
Oh, yeah.
I'm thinking about it. We'll see what happens. I could also finish Rebirth, but we'll see. I'm at that
You're
stage
not finishing that game before the end of the year.
Oh, fuck you, I am. The language, I'm sorry, but I'm doing it. That's the only one of the big RPGs I'm committing.
We'll see.
I just have a problem of like the new. When people are talking about something new that sounds good, I'm like, but that does sound good. So that's tough. Yeah. It's tough to go back to the old thing, even though the old thing is objectively good as well.
Mm-hmm. That's like me and Children of the Sun. I've been playing that one, the Devolver like sniper game.
Mm-hmm.
But I have code for Europa, and then I also have code for Phoenix Springs, and I'm just like, but I have 1 hour of this one left, but I want to play these new things.
It's the eternal struggle. Struggle. All right, well, listeners, I think that brings us to a close. So we are setting our status to away until next time. But before then, I'm going to ask you to do 3 things for us. If you could follow us on Twitter at Crossplay Convos, send this podcast to a friend, because that's how people hear about podcasts. And lastly, give us a review on your podcasting platform of choice, as it really, really does help. And with that, Paulie says, like, subscribe, share. I guess you got what you wanted. Another gaming podcast.
Wow, that was a good one.
That was a good one.
Thank you. Came up with that very late at night.